Senator Mark.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. So, Mr. Vice President, I know I only have 9 more minutes, and I would want to use up all my 9 minutes of original speaking time, I think. I think it's 9 minutes of original speaking time, if I'm not mistaken, sir. But I would want to go beyond that, sir. Yes, I know. Yeah. Mr. Vice President, I think that we would all agree, and the Honorable Minister would agree with me, that we have to balance the rights and interests of everyone. We are not, as the alternative government, opposed to students, Mr. Vice President, I beg your pardon, who would have graduated out of the Mona School, the dental school, out of Mona, Jamaica, Mr. Vice President, to practice their profession. We would like them to come and practice their profession and enter, as the Honorable Minister said, the public health system, so we can get more dentists in the system to service the needs of the population. I think PAHO statistics said, and Ms. Minister could correct me if I'm wrong, there should be 1 dentist for every 2,500 citizens of any country. That is the average that they have used. And I think the Honorable Minister said that we are way over 3,000 per dentist in our country. It might even be more than that, Mr. Vice President. If you're talking about 28 dentists in the public sector and 425 in total, and we are talking about 1.4 million people, we're talking about many more than that 1,300 and something, Mr. Vice President. So, Mr. Vice President, we are submitting that we have to protect the interests of those students who have studied for 5 years and they have graduated and they have now become, theoretically, for all intents and purposes, dentists. But, Mr. Vice President, we also have to safeguard the interests of the general public to ensure that those persons who have graduated are able to enter the system under certain quality assurance as well as certain standards that have been outlined in the legislation under the Dental Profession Act, which the Council is responsible for administering. So we want to balance the interests of all, Mr. Vice President. We want to ensure that the citizenry have access in the rural communities of our country to dental services. Because as you know, that is a dental service or dentistry is a component of the whole healthcare system in any country. And the Minister outlined the importance of healthcare in terms of dental healthcare, in terms of oral hygiene, etc. And the link between that and non-communicable diseases in many countries, including ours. So we understand and recognize its importance, that is dentistry as a profession. But Mr. Vice President, I cannot but emphasize the importance of ensuring that whatever we do, we safeguard the standards that people are able to adhere to. I think it is going to be wrong, and I don't think that is the intention of the minister. The minister cannot be telling us, Mr. Vice President, that these schools must just be pre-approved. And when people land here from Jamaica, they must just set up shop. I don't think the minister is saying that. The minister must be concerned about these students who are now dentists being able to practice and be given some kind of exams. If not an exam, I think, as I said, Mr. Vice President, if I'm not wrong, the dental school at UWI medical faculty, the medical faculty at the university, the dental school section, my understanding, Mr. Vice President, is that there is an internship program of 1 year when someone becomes a dentist before that person can gain registration. And Mr. Vice President, may I advise you that there are two levels of registration. You get a temporary registration, and during that registration period, you practice as an intern for 1 year. And after that year, Mr. Vice President, you get permanent registration. And therefore, you can now go and be employed either as a private dentist, or you can get into the public sector. So, all in all, we would like to give support to the measure that is before this Honorable House and Senate, sir. But we would like the Honorable Minister to provide us with some assurance that he's not going to open the floodgates and allow people to enter with all the necessary checks and balances to safeguard the national interests. That is what we are concerned about. And that is why, Mr. Vice President, we are so strong on this matter. We do not, as some of our colleagues believe, it's a simple and straightforward matter. It is not a simple and straightforward matter. It is very complex, it is very challenging, and we need to ensure that whatever we do, we cross the T's properly, we dot the I's. As I said, at the end of the day, we want our students who are dentists to come into the system and practice. We want them to be guided by standards set by the Dental Council. We want the public interest to be safeguarded and protected. And Mr. Vice President, if these things can be provided to us by the Honorable Minister in his winding up, as I said, in principle, we have no objection, Honorable Minister, to the motion. In principle, we have problems with the process in which people enter the system. And if we don't have the relevant checks and balances, we will injure the public's interest, Mr. Vice President. And that is why we would like to express these reservations about the motion before us today. And we call on the Minister in his winding up to provide some clarity, give us some sunshine, provide some rays of hope as it relates to why we must support this motion if there are not the necessary and sufficient checks and balances to safeguard the public interest, so that at all times the citizens must come first in this particular area of our activity. I wish to thank you very much, Mr. Vice President.
Senator Mahabir. Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. Mr. Vice President, the motion before us is relatively simple and straightforward. The problem the Honorable Minister of Health wishes to address is a deep-seated one, that is, dental health care in Trinidad and Tobago, with a limited number of dentists in total and an even smaller amount, from what was indicated, some 28 in the employ of the public service. Dental care is expensive, and as the Minister rightly indicated, dental health is a matter that we as a country must now focus on. In a joint select committee of which I have the honor of being chairman, we were looking at mental health, and now I think we ought to be looking at dental health as well as an important component of our health architecture in Trinidad and Tobago. I will speak to the motion, but first let me say, and let me give full support to the government and to the Honorable Minister of Health on the policy stance he has taken on sugary drinks in schools, which, of course, will contribute in no small way to reducing the incidence of diabetes and the teenage obesity in Trinidad and Tobago. The Act itself, I took an opportunity to review the Act while I'm looking at the particular section that the Minister wishes to amend, the list of schools. And in order to further improve dental health in Trinidad and Tobago, I would recommend to the Ministry of Health, through the Minister, of course, to Section 35 of the Dental Health Act, where it says a dental nurse is qualified to treat children only, and such treatment shall be carried out in facilities or services operated or conducted by government or under the direct or indirect supervision of a dentist in private clinics. My first experience, Mr. Vice President, with dental care was with a dental practitioner visiting the primary school that I attended, which is Kunupia Government Primary, and there a dental nurse was able to perform routine extractions on the children of the school. That was somewhere in the 60s. It had to be somewhere in the late 60s. And I don't know if the Ministry of Health has this particular roving clinic, which goes from primary school to primary school, where the dental nurses simply look at children, introduce them to dental care, give them some lessons on dental hygiene, and so we start the process in that way. The Act does, in fact, make provision for nurses treating children. And while there are definitions, different definitions of the child in various acts in Trinidad and Tobago, I fully support the definition in the Dental Health Act where a child is deemed to be under 12 years of age, because at that age we have a type of teeth which would be removed. These are the milk teeth, and then we will get our permanent teeth. So really the Act says the dental nurses will be able to treat children. I also had a look, and since we are looking at the public interest, at Clause 33 of the Dental Health Act, and we are, Mr. Vice President, focusing on protecting the public interest, and we would want to get really the most qualified dentists, and I'm coming to the essence and where the debate seems to be. You see, the Act says that we have a dental auxiliary who practices dentistry other than as a prescribed relation to a class of dental auxiliary. Clause 33 refers to one of these dental technicians who is performing dental work for which he's not authorized to perform, and is liable on summary conviction to a fine of $5,000 and to imprisonment for 6 months. I am of the view that certainly the consultations between the Dental Council and the Minister should have at least resulted in a recommendation for an increase of this fine, because I think it is really injurious to the public interest if we have someone who is not qualified to practice full-fledged dentistry and is performing the functions and maybe even advertising himself as such to only be faced with a fine of $5,000. Particularly, Mr. Vice President, where not so long ago in a traffic bill, we said someone who is driving, having had his driver's license suspended, he may be driving just not under the influence of anything, but he's caught, he has a fine of $10,000. So I think we need to be looking at the Act itself and seeing to what extent, to protect the public interest, we can amend Section 33 to really make portraying oneself as a dentist, if you're a dental technician, a more serious crime and a heavier fine. That is, of course, policy for the Ministry of Health. But, Mr. Vice President, I come to the motion itself. And if I were to refer to 5.1 of the Act, it says that a person is entitled to be registered to practice dentistry on making application, therefore, where he, A, is the holder of a diploma from a university, college, or other institution referred to in the schedule. The Act is very clear. He is the holder of certification from any of the institutions referred to in the schedule. There is a schedule, and under 5A1, it says clearly, without any doubt, the minister may by order, after consultation with the council, amend the schedule by amending thereto or deleting from any university, college, or other institution. So the minister is really performing a function given to him clearly by the Act for him to discharge. So I don't see any issue at all with the motion before us. The problem I have, and the minister in piloting his motion, indicating that the act itself is subject to review and that there will be consultations on revising the act. And I want to lend credence to something that was mentioned by my colleague, Senator Roach. The architecture of this law, for me, is very surprising. It has in the schedule a list of dental schools by country. We mentioned Trinidad and Tobago. We mentioned the United States of America. We mentioned Canada. We mentioned the United Kingdom, and that's it. What about dental schools in Brazil? I will come to that. What about the University of Otago, New Zealand, or the University of Adelaide in Australia? We have no school from Europe. We have, why this geographic bias towards the North Atlantic only? Apart from the United Kingdom, we have no school in Germany. And just as an aside, Mr. Vice President, if a young scholar were to ask me what should be his focus if he wishes to be a world-class dentist, focus of study, should it be biology, physics, or chemistry, I will tell him none of the above. I would say if you want to be a world-class dentist, study Swedish. See if you have a facility in language and study the language of Sweden. I'm coming to that. But I have a problem with the architecture of the law, and really the concern is why only the United States, Canada, the United Kingdom, Trinidad and Tobago? Well, as an academic myself, I looked at some of the schools listed under the United States of America. Many of them are good schools, but I saw two schools in the schedule. One is Oral Roberts University. It's still on the schedule, and one of the provisions of the act is for the Dental Council of Trinidad and Tobago to advise the minister to delete schools or add schools. Oral Roberts University and Emory University are both schools in the schedule. Well, Oral University Dental School closed in 1986. And Emory University's dental school closed in 1990. These are from the background checks that I have made, so that if someone were to tell me that they graduated from Oral Roberts University or Emory University in 2015, I will not register them, although the schedule says they must be registered to practice dentistry. I would think that the Dental Council would have gone through the list of all the schools, and it would have deleted schools where the dentistry program is no longer in existence, or where dentistry is no longer offered. Because if Oral Roberts graduated its last batch in 1986, its youngest dentist would be around age 60, close to retirement age. And therefore, we need to look at this particular list and determine whether we, in fact, need to clean up the list here. But the concern I have, again, is with the architecture of the law and with focusing on geography. Because, you see, if someone, a young student, were to come to Trinidad and Tobago, he presents his certificate, and he says he's from the University of Hong Kong. University of Hong Kong is not on the list. And I will mention, with your leave, Mr. Vice President, because I'm going somewhere, 5 universities. The Tokyo Medical and Dental University, it's not on the list. He or she will have to undertake a certification exam, board certification exam, by the Dental Council of Trinidad and Tobago. What about the Karolinska Institute in Sweden? It's not on the list. But it is, someone will have to undertake a board certificate exam in Trinidad. The Academic Center for Dentistry in Holland, ACTA. The Catholic University of Leuven from Belgium, KU Leuven. the University of Gothenburg in Sweden. What do these names have in common? Well, according to the QS World Rankings of dental schools, there are two rankings. It used to be the QS and the Times together. QS and Times parted company a few years ago, and they have different methodologies on how they rank schools with respect to the criteria with respect to global acceptance. The University of Hong Kong is ranked #1 in the world, according to the QS, based upon professors' research, students, but it's not on our list. The Tokyo Medical and Dental University, ranked #3, not on our list. The Karolinska Institute, Sweden, I mentioned Sweden before, #7 in the list in the world with respect to the pioneering work they have done in dental sciences. Academic Center for Dentistry in Holland, ACTA, ranked #8 in the world. The Catholic University of Louvain, Belgium, 9th in the world, not on our list. University of Gothenburg, Sweden, ranked #10. Amongst the top 10, I see two universities in Sweden, University of Gothenburg, #10, and the Karolinska Institute, #7. For a small country like Sweden to produce two institutes in the top 10 in the world means that they are taking dental care very seriously in Sweden. I also did not see in our list, though I saw the University of Puerto Rico in the list here, in our list, we have not considered the University of Havana. The University of Havana was founded in 1721, one of the oldest universities in our hemisphere, and we have not been looking at that institute. So someone from the University of Havana, which has a long-established medical and dental school, will have to undertake the particular exam. Yet we have institutes here. So of the top 10 universities, I saw only 3 on our list. One is Harvard Medical School, the University of Michigan, and a university in London, one of the London colleges of dentistry. And we have had something like 7 of them not in our list. Where am I going, Mr. Vice President? I think, according to the law, the Honorable Minister of Health is well within the powers granted with him in the law to seek to add this particular extra school to the schedule. But I think what we need to do, and he did raise it as he piloted his motion, we need to ask ourselves, given globalization now, you see, when this act was first proposed in 1980, the world was a very closed place. We did not see Europe. We did not see Asia. We did not see Australia and New Zealand. We did not see India. The University of Sao Paulo is ranked #19 in the world. But once you have a facility in Portuguese, many of our students should be considering some of those top-ranked schools for training, as opposed to only the closed world of the United States, Canada, England, Trinidad and Tobago, as it was in 1980. So many years later, 30-some years later, the world has become globalized. We have become much more capable in language. We have made strides at the University of the West Indies in language training. A range of languages is now offered at the CLL Institute, I think it's called, for language training. And that once students in Trinidad and Tobago have a passion for the field, I think we should now open the world to them. We should amend this particular Dental Professions Act, eliminate the schedule. I am all for eliminating the schedule. And I am in total support with the recommendation of Senator Roach that let us eliminate the schedule, which has a list of schools by geography, by country, and let us now open up the certification process towards the excellent work that is being done globally. It would be great if some of our students getting national scholarships can seek from the Ministry of Education to attend the University of Hong Kong. For some reason, the University of Hong Kong is ranked #1 and has been in the top 5 for the longest while. They are doing outstanding work, and I suspect that the training there is English. Hong Kong, I don't know what it is now. The University of Hong Kong may very well train in English, but the Swedish institutes, the Dutch institutes, the Brazilian institutes, and those in Australia and India, etc. I think if we could remove the schedule altogether, open up training, because ultimately this is what we want, and I think this is what the Minister of Health would like. The best dental care, the best dental practitioners, and affordable dental care, and universal dental care. And in that scenario, let us encourage our young students, if they have the capability and the language skills, look at some of those other schools so that there can be a cross-fertilization of skills. It would be, in my mind, Mr. Vice President, wonderful if some of our students were trained in Sweden, were trained in Belgium or Holland, and they can come and interact in conferences with some of the scholars who are trained in the more traditional areas of North America. That will do wonders for members of the Dental Council itself, because we will then obtain information and insights that we would not normally have from a range of outstanding countries in outstanding institutions across the world. I think we need to be looking at the hemisphere itself to recruit some of our dentists. True, we can grow some of our dentists at the University of the West Indies, and I am all in support of the training offered by the University of the West Indies. I must show my hand. I was a former academic at the University of the West Indies, and if I may say so myself, the training we offer is excellent training. Well, when I was there, I can't speak for now. But really, the University of the West Indies is our institution, and the minister, of course, simply seeks to amend a lacuna in the law so that we can add the Jamaica school to our schedule. But really, shouldn't we get rid of the schedule now, given that the top 10 schools, 7 of them are outside our list? Should we, Mr. Vice President, and this is a recommendation as we go forward with dental care in Trinidad and Tobago, this is left entirely for the minister and policy in the Ministry of Health. Should we not have the Dental Council then look at various schools, decide which of the schools, based upon the programs of which they have some familiarity, should be exempt from the Trinidad and Tobago examination of the Dental Council, and then when there are question marks, that subject some of those scholars to the examination before they can practice in Trinidad and Tobago. In a world of freer information, we ought to know someone, say, from the Karolinska Institute, may be exempt from any examination. That's ranked #7 in the world. We would think that if he has, based upon the recommendations of professors there on the performance of our scholar there, you can say, well, I don't think he or she needs to go through the exam. We have really professional contact, the Catholic University of Leuven, University of Gothenburg, so that there are instances where the Dental Council may say, we will waive the examination, and in other situations, there are instances where they say, we enforce the examination. And so we open the pool to a wide range of scholars, and we should not at all exempt Cuba, the University of Havana, from our list. Let us look at them. Let us, and the minister is more capable than most in knowing that the pharmaceutical sector of Cuba is ranked very highly in terms of the kinds of pharmaceuticals they produce. I may want to encourage him to look at the pharmaceuticals there, see whether, in fact, they can be accepted by the CARICOM and use them. They would be cheaper. But really, let us look at the training offered in places close to home, expand the geography. And if we do that, I think we are going to go a long way in ensuring that dental care in Trinidad and Tobago is not for the fortunate few, a simple cleaning of your gums and so on can easily cost you $1,000 at the dentist. The poor persons cannot afford that. We need to really make dental care much more accessible and readily available. I think the Minister of Health may consider using the nurse practitioners for the school program, but really getting much more dentists. Certainly from Cuba, I think you can look at getting dentists from Cuba to get the registration in Trinidad and Tobago. So we will be able to offer dental care facilities not only at our major hospitals. I see no reason why our health centers cannot be equipped with some basic dental facilities so that in the outlying area, in the Tocos and in the Morugas and so on, you can find people going into the health center on a particular day of the month, knowing that a dentist assisted by a nurse practitioner will be there to do dental checks, basic cleaning, and if there is anything more to be done, they refer them to the centers at Mount Hope and Port of Spain. But I think if we decentralize, and I'm with the minister on this, if we decentralize, we do need more practitioners. The practitioners that we have perhaps are not adequate. There are ways to supplement the pool, and what I see, according to the amendment, the motion offered by the minister, will add some. But I think if we were to look across the Caribbean, Latin America, across the world, we will do much better than if we confine ourselves to the 4 or 5 areas we have in the schedule. Mr. Vice President, I thank you, and I support the Honorable Minister with this motion. Thank you.
Minister of Health. Dr. Long, nobody rose. Senator Hussain. No problem. Senator Hussain, go ahead. No problem.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. Mr. Vice President, I thank you for allowing me the opportunity to contribute to this debate. Mr. Vice President, when we look at this order that was brought to the Senate by the Honorable Minister of Health in order to include dental students from the University of the West Indies, Mona, to be registered as practicing dentists in Trinidad and Tobago, we see that there's a disparity between the training programs between the two universities. And this was announced by the speakers before. But I just want to make note of one part of the training that I think is very important, and we must take note of this. In the Mona campus, I've been told, and I looked at the program schedule that they have online, and the students there, they complete the 4-year, it's a 5-year program, and 4 of the years they do more theoretical studies, and it's only in the last year they do 1 year of clinical studies. Whereas the position in Trinidad and Tobago in Mount Hope, the students here, they perform 3 years of clinical studies out of the 5 years, and an additional 1-year internship before they become registered as dentists. Now, the dental school in Mona, it's a very young school, it's fairly young, having been established in about 2010, 8 years ago, and around 2015 was the first batch of dentists that the school has produced. So by now they have about 3 batches of dentists. So one thing I did not hear the minister in his contribution address is the volume or the amount of students that graduate from the Mona school, and over that 3-year period, how many of them would have come to Trinidad for admission to practice. And Senator Roach, he mentioned that attorneys at law in the Caribbean who would be subject to the CLE and the Council of Legal Education, right? That's the regional body that governs the 3 law schools. That's the Eugene Dupuche Law School in Bahamas, the Norman Manley in Jamaica, and the Hugh Wooding Law School right here in Trinidad and Tobago. Now, the difference between that and what we are faced with here is that the Dental Council of Jamaica and Trinidad are different, whereas the Council of Legal Education they are one body that governs the 3 law schools, and when exams are being set, there's a harmonization because all exams are being approved by this regional body. And with respect to the dentists, there is no one body that approves the exams in Jamaica and in Trinidad for there to be any harmonization. So that is one point I would like to make. Now, the second point is that of the registration of a dentist. Now, in Trinidad and Tobago, as I said earlier, under Section 5(1)(a) of the Act, after completing the 5-year study at the Mount Hope campus, the students are required to undergo temporary registration, and thereafter they complete 1 year of clinical internship, and then they are registered by the Dental Council. Now, in Jamaica, there is no provision for this 1-year internship. As soon as the students they graduate from the Mona campus, they write the exam, and then they become registered as dentists in Jamaica. I don't know if the minister has any information with respect to that, on how that works in Jamaica, so that we can again see that we need to synchronize the training and the way in which dentists are registered. Because on one hand, you can't have to write an exam in Jamaica and then come in Trinidad, and you don't. Now, this in itself, the order which it tries to correct that mistake of the inequity that students currently, as it stands, they have to come to Trinidad who graduated from Mona and write an exam before they are registered. Now, is the position that once this order is passed today in the Senate, that a student who graduates from Mona and comes to Trinidad, they have automatic entry to register as a dentist. Whereas a student who graduates from Mona still has to undergo that 1-year internship before he's registered. So is it that now the Jamaican I don't want to say Jamaicans, is it that the graduates from the Jamaican school, they will only be required to undergo 5 years of schooling to become registered as dentists, and that students in Trinidad will now have to undergo 6, which is the 5-year at the Mount Hope and 1-year internship? So is it that we are now creating another inequity for the students who graduate from Mount Hope? And with respect to the schools that are on the schedule, my position, the position on this is that the Dental Council is the body responsible for the registration of dentists in Trinidad and Tobago for them to operate and practice here. Why don't we give the Dental Council the autonomy to decide on the schools that they would like to accredit on their list, and remove that power from the minister? Because it will, right now we are picking up a lot of parliamentary time in order for the minister to bring certain orders here. And as Senator Mahabir would have said, that the schedule itself needs cleaning up, because there are certain schools that no longer offer dentistry as in their curriculum, and then there are other schools that we should have included. So should we remove the power from the minister and give it solely to the Dental Council? So that is one of the concerns that I have. Now, when we look at what the policy behind this order is that basically what the minister has articulated is that he wants there to be more dentists in Trinidad and Tobago. Now, the problem that can happen here now is that, for example, we have dentists coming from all over the world setting up shop right here in Trinidad. All they do is write the exam. Now, it can, in fact, alleviate the shortage, but is the public service ready to hire all of these additional dentists? Are we in a position to do so? Because to my knowledge, there are hundreds of doctors who have graduated, who are home right now and not being offered contracts. And they are at the stage of house officers, having undergone their internship period. And when we look at dentists who practice in Trinidad who are unregistered, the fine is just $5,000. Therefore, we will see that there are more and more dentists popping up, and all they're liable to is $5,000. So can we revisit also the fine for persons who practice who are unregistered? And we also see that when we have a growing number of dentists, there will be a growing number or a greater demand for auxiliary staff. And under the Act, dental auxiliaries is defined as dental assistants, dental hygienists, dental nurse, and dental technicians. There are 4 categories. Now, these persons, once they qualify by the dental council, they are on a roll, but they are not on a register, unlike the dentists. The dentists are on a roll, and then you have a register of dentists. So I'm asking why we don't create a similar like as dentists to put them on a register, so therefore, on a constant basis, we can monitor who are these registered technicians and nurses, because far too often we see a lot of persons who claim they are technicians setting up shop and making teeth, making dentures, gold caps. And we need to regulate this. We need to clamp down on these instances. And increase the fine, because the fine for these unregistered dental auxiliary, it's increasing. Now, I don't know if the minister is following, but as I said earlier, if we increase the dental staff by hiring more dentists, obviously we'll have to increase the auxiliary staff. Now, when we look at the age of this act, it was a 1980 act. Technology has changed. We are in a modern time now. Therefore, there are further reforms that need to be legislated here.
Senator.
Yes.
I want you to rein in your contribution in relation specifically to the motion at hand, which speaks to adding a school to the schedule. So could you bring it in very tightly? Because what you're doing now is you're actually going into the act itself. And I've heard the points that you've made before. So if you can bring it into the school, and the fact that the minister has actually made an order to bring this into the schedule and keep it tight.
I'm guided, please, Mr. Vice President. Now, with the students who graduate from Mona and they come to practice here in Trinidad, because of the disparity in the program and the difference in the training that they would have received in the both institutions, now the standards that may have been applicable at the Mount Opo thought here, we don't know if it falls lower than the standard of Mona or if it's higher. Now, this would bring rise to certain instances of malpractice in certain instances. So therefore, we would now see that the Dental Council, as a body, will have to be responsible for treating with matters of this in terms of disciplining dentists, in terms of misconduct and malpractice. And this will be born out of the training that these persons would have received at the institutions. So I'm asking, and the Dental Council has requested, I think the minister has the correspondence, that the powers be widened for their disciplinary action in terms of they only have 3, which is censure, suspension, and removal from the rules. So they're asking for ADR, alternative dispute resolutions, and also for the power to grant restitution. And in this instance, I would like to say that we need to create that harmonization of the both programs in order to alleviate or so that we can escape problems such as these. And we on the side, we are not opposed to bringing in professionals and causing them to be registered in Trinidad and Tobago, because I think that we have the capacity, we have the creativity to do great. And we would support this motion, but the minister needs to take note of the concerns that the opposition has. And I thank you.
Senator Ramkissoon.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. It is quite late in the evening, so a lot has been said about this motion. It is a challenge now to bring something a little bit different and new. But as this is the first time I'm standing to address this chamber for the year 2018, I just want to extend to you, Mr. Vice President, to all senators, to the viewing public, I wish you all the best for 2018. A lot of good health, strength, and prosperity throughout the year. So, Mr. Vice President, we are here to talk about the motion that was piloted by the Minister of Health. And it was based on an order that was made on the 10th of November, 2017. Now, the minister did open up the debate a little bit by bringing in the relationship to the RHA Act, as well as the letter from the council, as well as the letter from the accreditation division. So it is a little bit more that we expected than what was before us or sent via prior to preparation for today's debate. So when I initially read the motion, I thought, okay, we want to add another university to the list or to the schedule that exists in the present Dental Profession Act. Okay, that seems very a simple clause that gives that power to the minister to bring that here today for us to review and also accept and go through this debate. And I went to the website for the Dental Council of Trinidad and Tobago. It's a very informative website. It actually had a registered list of all the dentists in Trinidad and Tobago, or registered dentists of Trinidad and Tobago, and the number I saw was 476. So I know the minister gave another number, so I could be corrected, but that was the number I saw as of yesterday. And the list shared that we have 476 to a population of 1.4. So that says about 2,900 persons to one dentist. But this is not always how it goes, because dentist is not assigned to a particular group of people, but is where they decide to practice, which has come up before. And the minister even brought up the case of rural areas. And that's, to touch on that, I just wanted to bring forward a very interesting paper that was written in 2007. And it was the development of dentistry in Trinidad and Tobago. And I do have an excerpt of this, which is an historical overview of dentistry in Trinidad and Tobago. And it shared that in the past, in 1957, we only had 85 dentists. In 1962, we only had 93. It went down in 1968 to 62, 1972 to 55. So you understand the need for dentists at that time, because we didn't have. The area that this document went into was talking about dentists who are practicing in Trinidad and Tobago without registration, which I thought the minister was going to raise when he addressed the area of rural development. And it actually referred to a term, quacks is the problem. And it even gave a statistic to say that up to 200 or so continue to practice. And it's a mixed bag of untrained folks, practitioners, dental technicians, people with some element of dental clinical training, but without any qualifications, and those with dental qualification unrecognized by the Dental Council. And they still appear to be popular with many people from the lower social economic groups who view them as a poor man's dentist. So I thought that was the point that we was trying to highlight with the rural development, or the areas that are not city or town, to have these persons who are practicing without being registered or accredited by or blessed by the Dental Council. What I found interesting is this particular schedule spoke to address or to bring in Mona, or students who have studied at Mona, Jamaica, the University of the West Indies, yes. And I also learned that there are 28 dentists for the last 20 years, we have had 28 dentists. We're trying to fill a gap by bringing in another school or more students to fill a gap for a structure that has not been confirmed. That is what I got from the piloting. So I'm not sure if I am wrong in this assumption, and I would like the minister, if I am wrong, please correct me. Because it seems to me that there is a structure to be implemented for 128 dentists, or 100 and something X number, and we are only at 28 dentists for the public sector, which is facilitating 1 million people. And we have about 61 or so plus positions to be filled. And my initial thought after reading the motion, reading the act is, so what about the 86 universities on the list? Because we have 1 from Trinidad and Tobago, 60 from the United States, 20 from Canada, and
Senator,
we have...
I don't want you to, as much as that has happened prior, 2 things are happening here. 1, you get into a point of repetition of points that have been made before, specific to the list and schools that are not on the list, or even any other schools on the list. We're dealing with one particular school that is going to be added to the list. So I want you to move forward from that point in relation to any other schools on the list and schools that are not existing on the list.
The Vice President, my point is not to add schools or the schools that, my point was really to say, and it was actually to tie in with Senator Haynes' point that she made earlier in relation to existing dentists who are registered, who do not have jobs. Because, for example, so that was the point of referring to the list that has the 87 recognized schools, because we have 476 students, so, registered dentists. So let me see if I could put it across a different way. For example, there is a new, I live in La Romaine, there's a new building now opened, and the dentist there happens to be a friend of the family. He is younger than I, and he now opened his practice. So I asked him, how come he's at such a young age, you're entering into private practice, you're going to be practicing as a private paid dentist? And he said, because he cannot find a job on the outside, so he has to take a loan to now build his own clientele, because it's not like he came out of school with a clientele to facilitate. So I'm not sure what is happening right now in the ministry or in the dental practitioners or the council, but I don't want us to leave with the thinking that there's a shortage, because there are persons who are there with the qualifications who can fill the gaps which if vacancies do exist, okay? Right, so my other point is related to the council letter, which was dated the 19th of September 2016, and that will tie into Section 5A of the bill, which says that the minister may, by order, after consultation with the council. And my interpretation of that, if anyone is writing this into the bill, or if as legislators ourselves, if we write with consultation, we would expect the minister to consult, yes, but also take our advice, because we're not asking anybody to be on this dental council. We're asking person, according to Section 5, to be candidates for election as chairman or vice chairman shall have at least 5 years standing as practicing dentist. So it's not, we cannot be in the dental council. You need to be an experienced dentist, practicing dentist, to be on the council. And so the advice holds some merit or some weight. So I hear the point that the schedules by listed, that was the first point. The second point that was raised by the minister while he's piloting is that a review of the curriculum every 5 years for UE, but not for I support his argument with this, because if you look at the list of schools, different schools have different curriculums and different requirements. For example, some of the schools has 7 years programs, and they're considered as registered dentists. Like ours is 5 years, Mona is 5. So I support his point on that we don't really need to follow up. We don't have to fault them on the review of the curriculum because other schools have different programs, different lengths of studies, and different requirements to be listed, and they have passed the test because they have been accredited by the American Council. So the third point was the council question need for the list of schedules, and there was, as you said, many other senators have raised the disparity in the listing. So my question, Mr. Vice President, or my concern is, after we heard the council's objections in 2016, we are in 2018, have the council rewritten the minister and said this is their new position given in light of what had happened in the other place debates? Or have they relooked at it considering that they have reviewed or relooked at Mona curriculum and said, okay, well, we have more information now. We have heard from the CAAHP, which is the Caribbean Accreditation Authority in Medical and Health Professions. So we've heard from them, we're here to accredited. Okay, we now have a new position. Did they do that? Because, Mr. Vice President, we are legislators and we take guidance from professionals. If you want a professional opinion on the engineering of this building, I will gladly give it to you as a registered engineer in the Board of Engineering of Trinidad and Tobago. But I will not go into the Dental Council and give them advice on things that is not my core responsibility. So that is why I would have liked to hear from the minister, to hear what is their new position, if they have a new position, because the law clearly states that with consultation from the Dental Council, right? So we as the legislators, or we in the Senate, should really take advice, yes, from the minister, but after hearing the consultation that was given to the minister and the way forward. And this would also ease our minds, Mr. Vice President, when we are supporting this motion. We would say, okay, yes, the professionals had blessed it, and we can then support it with ease. Mr. Vice President, this is truly an act that many have found some loopholes in. I would like to tell the minister, through you, I would like to share with the minister that I see some merit in having a list of schools in the law. And the only reason is because they would have gone through with a fine-teeth comb why they have picked these particular schools. When you open it up, you allow everyone to come to practice here. And we already have a provision to allow any and every person to be given an opportunity where they will have to pass examinations and go through our review committee before giving them, I think they have to go through a temporary, registration, thank you, a temporary registration to allow them to practice for a certain amount of time, which the Dental Council will then review and make sure that, okay, yes, you are who you say you are. So I wouldn't say there's no merit to the list of schedules. There is someone has gone through these particular schools. I would also recommend that they go through the schools, because when I was doing my own research, there was errors within it. So, Mr. Vice President, let me finish. So I am saying thank you. And with those few words, I thank you.
Minister of Trade.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. I rise in support of this motion that has been tabled by my colleague, the Honorable Minister of Health, Terrence Deyalsingh. Mr. Vice President, before I make my short, not so short, but short contribution, I would like to take this opportunity to extend my profoundest congratulations to the first female president-elect of this country, Paula Mae Weeks. Like so many other women in this country, I am delighted that she has agreed to give public service in this regard, and we warmly welcome her to the presidency of the imminent presidency of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. Mr. Vice President, I want to thank you for allowing me to join this debate. I must admit, I do not think that there is much argument with respect to this amendment, not from the speakers that I've heard so far. Mr. Vice President, what lies before us here is very simple. But I just want to go back to a point that was made, I think, by Dr. Mahabir when he commented on the powers, no, was Senator Roach, when he commented on the powers of the minister. The minister has the power, we all agree, to add or to remove from the act. The Dental Council acts on behalf of the Minister of Health. And once the Minister of Health consults with the Dental Council, that is what the law requires. The law does not state that the Minister of Health must obtain the approval and or agreement of the Dental Council. And it reminds me of a lesson that I learned many, many years ago in my former incarnation as president. That time I was not president, I was an officer of the PSA. And I learned that lesson from a former prime minister of this country, Baptiste-Primus. At the time, the president of the PSA had a dinner, Christmas dinner, and former Prime Minister Baptiste-Primus was himself the leader of the Sugar Union. And we were engaged, a group of us around him, in a very interesting conversation. And it turned towards what consultation is. And he said very simply, listen, consultation is, I am the leader of the opposition, and the Prime Minister calls me and said, leader of the opposition, I intend to move a glass from the left-hand side to the right-hand side. What do you say? And he said, I object. And the Prime Minister would say, thank you very much, and proceeds to move the glass from left to right. And what he pointed out, and I've never forgotten that lesson, consultation does not mean agreement. And that is a very relevant point in this regard. I sat here and I interpreted the information that was shared, that the Dental Council has somehow attempted to lobby members of the independent benches, members of the opposition benches. You know, and I have a serious problem with that, because the Dental Council is there to carry out the instructions of the Honorable Minister, instituting policy on behalf of the government. And therefore, I am quite sure that the Minister of Health consulted with the Dental Council. And in that context, it is the intention to make this situation better for our citizens and also those of CARICOM. And I will present my case to you and to this House, Mr. Vice President. This amendment seeks to make one change to the Dental Professions Act, Chapter 2954. What it seeks to do is to add the University of the West Indies, Faculty of Medical Sciences, Dental School at Mona Campus, Jamaica, to the current schedule of the Act. This one addition, Mr. Vice President, would allow graduates from UWI Mona Campus to automatically register to practice dentistry in Trinidad and Tobago after the successful completion of a 1-year period of vocational training without the need to write an additional exam. So that the point that was made earlier, that there is no internship period, that is a wrong perception that has developed. Mr. Vice President, it is difficult for me to fathom any reason for opposition to this amendment. Quite simply, the Dental Profession Act was created in 1980. In 1999, it was amended to include the University of the West Indies, Faculty of Medical Sciences, Dental School at St. Augustine, Mount Hope campus. At that time, this was the only dental school within the ambit of the University of the West Indies. Since then, the University of the West Indies Mona campus has established a dental school which is internationally accredited, Mr. Vice President. This is no fly-by-night dental school that has been opened in Jamaica. It follows logically then, Mr. Vice President, that the government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago would seek to include the campus in the schedule of the Dental Profession Act, allowing the graduates to register and so practice in Trinidad and Tobago. I listened to my colleagues in the lower house, Mr. Vice President, and even here, some of my colleagues. And I must say that I felt such pain for those persons dependent on the public health system for their dental services at present. My colleagues mentioned that there are only 28 dentists in the public sector. As a mother, I am concerned that there are people in rural areas who do not have adequate access to dental services. As 28 persons, Mr. Vice President, all of us here in this chamber would agree, you can only stretch 28 persons only so far. It is heart-wrenching to hear that the wait time for dental services in the public health system can range from 3 to 6 months. A direct result of the fact that there are roughly 35,800 patients and only 28 dentists in the public sector. One has only to think of a toothache, Mr. Vice President. Imagine that dull ache and sometimes sharp throb. Imagine having to wait 3 to 6 months to be able to have the tooth looked at. I dare say, Mr. Vice President, that you nor I would wait that length of time. Instead, all of us in this chamber here would seek out a private dentist and address the issue forthwith. As I look around this chamber, I know that most of us will do so. But you see, Mr. Vice President, we are privileged to have the means to do so. But there are people in our societies who just do not have those means. They just do not have them. So many families where paying for a private dentist would mean that they could not afford basic necessities. Must we therefore, Mr. Vice President, continue to relegate these persons, our citizens, to a 3 or 6 month time wait? I think not, Mr. Vice President. That is why I support the inclusion of the University of the West Indies Mona campus in the schedule of the Dental Profession Act. Mr. Vice President, the current situation may also be worsened at present by the economic conditions, the economic climate that exists in Trinidad and Tobago. Because, you see, while the government has been pushing forward and working towards economic growth, in recent times, a number of citizens have been made to face some significant lifestyle changes. A number of these citizens may now find themselves relying on the public health system for dental services for the first time in their collective lives. A public health system that still only has 28 dentists. These citizens and their needs are at the forefront of my thoughts as I support this amendment, knowing that whatever small increase in the number of available dental professionals which may result from the inclusion of UWI Mona campus, will be one more chance for those most vulnerable persons to access the services they need within a reasonable time frame. But you know, Mr. Vice President, more than anything else, we must understand what our citizens in this country, what they undergo when they go to UWI Mona campus, Jamaica, to study dentistry. And I just want to quote Mr. Vice President, if you would permit me. A letter dated the 1st of March 2017, addressed to my honorable colleague from Warren Straker. And this is what he had to say, and I quote, "Non-integration of the graduates from Doctor of Dental Surgery program at UWI Mona campus for full registration under the Dental Professional Act 16 of 1980 and into the vocational training program of the School of Dentistry, UWI St. Augustine campus." And he says, "I am Warren D. Straker, student number 6200437762, a 2017 final year student of the Doctor of Dental Surgery program of the University of the West Indies, Faculty of Medical Sciences, Dental School, Mona Campus, Jamaica." Not a foreign university, Mr. Vice President, the University of the West Indies. "It has been brought to my attention that the 2015 and 2016 DDS Trinidadian graduates from the said Mona campus have not been afforded the opportunity for temporary registration under Trinidad and Tobago Dental Profession Act because the UWI Mona campus is not among the universities, colleges, or institutions listed in the schedule to the Dental Profession Act 16 of 1980, Chapter 2954, amended by Act 31 of 1998. Understandably, as Mona DDS started in 2010, with its first graduate in 2015, this situation has negatively impacted on the seamless inclusion of Mona graduates into UWI St. Augustine. And he went on to quote various aspects of the Act. And this is what he had to say further. "Graduates from UWI Mona campus, Faculty of Medical Sciences, Doctor of Dental Surgery are considered unsuitable for full registration and are required to pass the board examination. However, these graduates from Trinidad and Tobago University of the West Indies Medical Sciences who have successfully completed a one-year vocational training will be eligible for full registration." Then he appealed to the Minister of Health to share with him efforts that were being pursued. He ended his letter by saying, "A moment that should be celebrated both by me, my cohorts, and my country lies in uncertainty. Our country has invested thousands of dollars in much-needed human capital development through GATE, and we, on the other hand, hard work, dedication, and commitment to now, at the end of their course of study, plus the vocational training, not to be accepted in Trinidad and Tobago." And the young man who soon to be called Dr. Warren Straker, therefore appealed to the Honorable Minister of Health. Mr. Vice President, what are the implications of this amendment? The implications are that persons such as Warren Straker, who graduated from the dental school at UWI Mona campus, will be automatically allowed to register to practice dentistry without the need to write an additional examination. In Jamaica, I understand, I'm advised, that in Jamaica they are required to pass the Jamaica board exam, then they are eligible to work in Barbados, the Bahamas, and in Jamaica. These graduates, Mr. Vice President, they're our citizens. They're citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. They are also our CARICOM brothers and sisters. Why then would we not want to remove this unnecessary barrier that prevents our children and our CARICOM brothers and sisters from offering their services? How can it be possible to justify the inclusion of over 50 dental schools in the United States of America, 10 from Canada, and 17 from the United Kingdom, yet deny the inclusion of our own University of the West Indies Mona campus? It makes no sense, Mr. Vice President. Charity begins at home. Let us support our own. Let us support our region. Mr. Vice President, I know that during difficult times, questions can be raised about foreigners coming into this country and taking the jobs of locals. But as the esteemed Minister of Health stated, there is need for 137 dentists in the public health sector. There are currently 28, and there have been 28 for the past 20 years, Mr. Vice President. This means that there are vacancies. There are places for these professionals to occupy, places for which no locals are contesting. In addition, Mr. Vice President, if those dentists come to Trinidad and Tobago and open, even if they don't go into the public sector and they open private practices, they will then generate employment for other workers, such as receptionists. If you go to a dentist privately, there is a receptionist, take your name, take your different information, dental assistants, maintenance professionals, and other related jobs. In this way, we are presented with something of a win-win situation here, where the professionals either provide a public service or generate employment in the private sector. And that is why, Mr. Vice President, I sincerely do not believe that there's any question here. There is no reason for opposition to this amendment. This simple amendment only aims to increase the pool of dentists available to practice in Trinidad and Tobago while affording our citizens the right after studying in Jamaica to practice what they learned over the years. If utilized effectively, this situation will ultimately allow for greater coverage and access to dental services across the length and breadth of Trinidad and Tobago. I'm therefore convinced that all of the contributions will simply state their support of the amendment and the belief that the barrier to UWI Mona campus graduates should be removed. In conclusion, Mr. Vice President, as I have said before, the motion before this Senate is a very simple one. The proposed amendment is a logical, necessary progression from the establishment of a sound, internationally accredited dental school at the University of the West Indies Mona campus. To continue to exclude this campus, Mr. Vice President, from the schedule of recognized universities in the Dental Profession Act, Chapter 2954, would only serve as a signal that Trinidad and Tobago does not have confidence in the institution and our own regional tertiary education system. This government, the government that Dr. Keith Rowley leads, chooses to show its support for the University of the West Indies, and so moves to include the UWI Mona campus dental school into the schedule of the Act. Mr. Vice President, I believe that this amendment is a critical step forward and will assist in improving the access of dental services throughout the country, as well as likely resulting in an increase in employment opportunities where the professionals establish private practice. Finally, Mr. Vice President, I therefore reiterate my unswerving support for this amendment and to commend my honorable colleague, the Minister of Health, Terrence Deyalsingh, for bringing this critical motion to amend the Dental Profession Act, Chapter 2954. And I thank you, Mr. Vice President, for the opportunity to contribute to this debate on this motion.
Senator Ramdeen.
Mr. Vice President, good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to contribute to this debate that seeks to approve an order that was presented by the Honourable Minister of Health. I hope, Mr. Vice President, in my contribution this afternoon, to focus on one very narrow issue that may assist the members of the Senate in determining whether they support the approval of the order that was presented. I wish to make one general point about the motion and the order, Mr. Vice President, and then go directly to my contribution with respect to the particulars of the order. Mr. Vice President, the Minister of Health, Mr. Deyalsingh, is one of those members of Parliament that always seeks to provide the greatest amount of information that he can in his capacity as the Minister of Health. And I want to say that in preparing for this debate, and I'll get down to exactly why I say so, I want to say that I don't make any criticism at all directed at the Minister of Health. But it is a difficult position, Mr. Vice President, to be asked, pursuant to the Dental Profession Act, to determine whether this order that was made by the Minister ought to get the affirmative resolution of the Parliament, when what you are provided as the subject of the debate is one page, which contains only the order. And we have had many occasions recently when we've passed legislation where we, as a matter of course, insert a clause in the legislation for an affirmative or a negative resolution for that legislation when things have to be done. And may I suggest, from where I sit in the opposition, that when orders of this nature come before the Parliament, whether it be the lower house or whether it be the Senate, that the members who are asked to debate and to approve or to vote on this matter be provided with the material that is necessary to make an informed decision as to whether we give our support to a motion like this. Because from where I sit, Mr. Vice President, I don't think there's anybody in the government, the opposition, or in the independent bench that would seek to not give its approval to any motion or any matter that would improve the healthcare system in our country. And if, I'm sure, when Minister Deyalsingh was sitting on this side of the bench, I'm sure that that position would have been the same. Because all citizens of this country, Mr. Vice President, understand the importance of healthcare to the entire citizenry of this country. Healthcare, education, and national security are perhaps the three most important aspects of governance and critical aspects of governance that the government faces today. And therefore, I just think that when we have a motion like this, many of the speakers that have gone before have said it's a very simple matter. It's just a simple matter of approving the order. And if I can get down now directly to the legislation so that I can drill down into the one matter that I want to deal with. But before I do that, Mr. Vice President, please allow me the latitude to just refute one matter that the Honourable Minister of Labour dealt with in her presentation respectfully. And that is, the Minister of Labour said that, and I have it written here, and if I misquote the Minister of Labour, I'll happily give way, that the Dental Council, its role is to carry out the policy of the government and the Minister. And happily, Mr. Vice President, the functions of the Dental Council are laid out at Section 12 of the Dental Profession Act. And just to, if I would like to put it this way, to correct that statement, the functions of the Council pursuant to the Act, Mr. Vice President, shall be, and they're set out there statutorily, to determine and keep under review the professional qualifications and experience required of an applicant for registration or enrollment accept applicants entitled to registration under Section 51A. B, to register dentists and enroll dental auxiliaries. C, to regulate the training of persons enrolled as dental auxiliaries. D, to publish for general information a list of universities, colleges, or other institutions, the diplomas of which are recognized by the Council. E, to appoint a board of examiners for the purpose of conducting examinations required by this Act to be conducted. F, to define the dental work which any class of dental auxiliary may undertake, and the conditions, if any, under which a dental auxiliary may undertake such work. G, to ensure the maintenance of proper standards of the professional conduct by dentists and dental auxiliaries. And H, to hold inquiries into allegations of improper or unprofessional conduct by dentists and dental auxiliaries, and to discipline those found guilty. And when one looks carefully, Mr. Vice President, with the most generous interpretation to the powers that are conferred or the functions that are defined by Section 12 of the Act, there is absolutely no room for an interpretation that the powers of the Dental Council is to carry out the policy of the government and the minister. And I know that the Honorable Minister will agree with that. Now, the Dental Profession Act, that Section 5A, which we are asked, and from which the Minister derives his powers to present the order that has been made. If I can read, Mr. Vice President, 5A1, the Minister may by order, after consultation with the Council, amend the schedule by adding thereto or deleting therefrom any university, college, or other institution. Now, Mr. Vice President, it's a very, very dangerous thing for anyone to seek to give advice outside of the qualification which they have. And I would render that advice to everyone, that it is a very dangerous thing to do that. Because the Honorable Minister of Labour said, well, she had a discussion, or was party to a discussion by the former Prime Minister, Mr. Bastille Pandey, about what is the meaning of consultation. And respectfully, Mr. Vice President, that is the issue that I particularly want to drill down into this afternoon. Because there is a presumption that when Parliament legislates with an intention. And if the Parliament, when they passed the Dental Profession Act, Chapter 2954, did not have some intention behind circumscribing the powers of the minister by the duty to consult with the Dental Council, then one would expect that the minister could do as he pleases. The minister can take out and to add to the schedule. But there is a specific provision in Section 5A1 that places a statutory duty upon the minister to consult with the council. It says, after consultation with the council are the exact words that are made. And, Mr. Vice President, it's very important when we debate an order of this nature to understand, for all of us who are asked to vote on this at the end of the debate, what does consultation mean in these circumstances where you have legislation that imposes a statutory duty to consult? And respectfully, Mr. Vice President, that is not a duty that one can simply cast aside, or one can simply say that at the end of the day, it is much more, and respectfully, I would say to the minister, it is much more than simply writing a letter to the Dental Council and thinking that that is a discharge of the statutory duty to consult. That's your interpretation. Well, Mr. Vice President, I'm happy that there are those who think that that is my interpretation. That's why I always come prepared. So let me start down with the interpretation that one alleges is Ramdeen's interpretation. Mr. Vice President, let me quote from the leading text on public law, because I didn't write this. So let me start. Consultation and the duty to consult is one that has been defined very clearly by the case law, not Ramdeen. And let me tell you where the duty to consult, it is a duty, the duty to consult that is imposed by legislation. Let me tell you what that duty mandates the decision maker to do. The duty to consult started with a decision of the Court of Appeal in R versus Brentwood London Borough Council, a very celebrated decision, ex parte gunning. And this was a decision of the English Court of Appeal where they arrived at what they call the gunning principles about consultation. And from that case, let me tell you what consultation means. I did not decide this case. This was decided by another judge, Judge Hudson, sitting in the Queen's Bench Division in 1985. The quotation is 1985-84 LGR 168. And these principles were derived, and they have been followed by the English Court of Appeal up to now in 2018 from 1985, and they have been crystallized over time. But let me go right to what it means. Number one, consultation is undertaken at a time when the relevant proposal is still at a formative stage. Number two, adequate information is provided to the consultees to enable them properly to respond to the consultation exercise. Number three, consultees are afforded adequate time in which to respond. And number four, the decision maker gives conscientious consideration to the consultees' responses. And if I can say through you, Madam President, to the Honorable Minister of Health, why it is important for us to understand, first of all, what the duty to consult entails, and why it is important for us to understand and make sure that the Minister of Health gets it right in the discharge of that duty under the Act, Section 51A. It is because there are third parties that are going to be directly affected if this order is approved, so that the Dental Council has an interest in the discharge of their functions under the Dental Profession Act to monitor the members of their profession. And there are persons who are practicing dentists registered now who will also be affected by the decision to allow other persons to be registered if this order is approved. So that we must get it right, because if the minister is allowed to get it wrong, the decision that would flow out of this order being approved can be subject to challenge in the courts. And you see, I made the point at the very beginning that it is important for us to be provided with the information so that as parliamentarians sitting here making law, we can make an informed decision at the end of the day that is in the best interest of the legislation that we pass. That is what our duty here is to do. Our duty here is not to simply approve what is brought by the government for those on the government side and simply oppose on the opposition side. We have a duty to get it right. And the only way that we can get it right is if we start off by understanding what it is to get it right. So we've said, and it's not very often that I disagree with my friend Senator Roach, but it is very clear as to what the duty to consult means. The Honourable Minister tells us that he wrote to the Dental Council in September 19th of 2016. They replied. Oh, let me apologize. I asked what were the dates for the specific purpose of knowing when the conversations took place with the Dental Council and when the Dental Council replied. So I can't even, as a part, I'm being asked to approve this order, but I don't know if the Minister of Health spoke to the Dental Council in September of 2015. I know that they replied in September of 19th, 2016, but I don't know when any proposals were sent to them. So I should be in a position, Madam President, as a member of Parliament, being asked to approve this order, to at least be told what took place. How can I ever responsibly discharge my duty to support or to not support this order if I simply don't know what took place? And it's not my duty to find out what took place, because what took place takes place between the minister, the Honourable Minister, and the Dental Council. I am not the minister, and I don't sit on the Dental Council, and I am not a dentist. I am a member of Parliament simply trying to discharge my duty. And respectfully, Madam President, this is an order that is being brought by the Honourable Minister. The duty rests at the feet of the Minister to inform all of us, not only the members of the government, the members of the opposition, and the members of the independent bench, to tell us what took place. We have a right to know, because at the end of the day, we take responsibility for what transpires here. So let's get down to the nitty-gritty of consultation. When considering what is required in a particular case, the courts are likely to have regard to a number of factors as to determining whether consultation was properly discharged or not. So one of the first things that one must understand as to whether the duty to consult has been discharged is whether consultation was done at the time when this proposal was in a formative stage. Well, we don't know when the proposal was made to begin with. So we can't start answering the question of whether the minister, in the discharge of his function to consult, which the case law, not Ramdeen, says that you must do while in a formative stage. Well, we just don't know. So I don't know how anyone sitting here this afternoon could properly discharge their function when we have a right to know when did the consultation take place. It must, in law, it must take place at when the policy is in a formative stage. So, and the reason behind that, Madam Vice President, is simple. In order for you to have proper consultation, the public authority, in this case being the Minister of Health, must be in a position to have an open mind when the consultation is taken place. Nobody is suggesting that the minister is bound by what the person who he consults with or has a duty to consult with, that he must accept. But he must have an open mind at the time when the consultation is taking place. And respectfully, Madam President, we just can't answer that question. And it's not my view, Madam President, but the case law says if consultation takes place only after the proposal has gone beyond the formative stage, the decision may also be liable to challenge on the grounds of premeditation. So how can any one of us discharge our responsibility to the people of this country in an absolute vacuum? Because there are one or two of the speakers who said they have information about letters passing between the Dental Council and the minister. But we have a right to be provided with that material so that we could make an objective decision at the end of the day whether the decision to consult has been lawfully carried out in the particulars of this particular case in relation to this particular order. And I find it surprising that we will have a debate, right? And none of us, no one here, makes a fuss about the idea that we've just not been provided with the information. Now, the second aspect of consultation that the minister is statutorily bound to carry out in the particulars of Section 5(1)(a) of this particular act in relation to this particular order is that the persons to be consulted must be provided with sufficient information about the proposal. Can anybody here join this debate and tell us what was the Dental Council provided with by the minister in this particular case? Well, as far as I can say, I just don't know. So, the second aspect of consultation, well, I can't say, and I can't give the minister the benefit of the doubt, because that's not what we're here about, giving the benefit of the doubt. We should be sure that when we say hey or nay to this order, we know that we are confident that we are discharging our duty from an informed position. And unfortunately, yet again, we can't say that. And that's no fault of our own. The third aspect of it, Mr. Vice President, Madam President, and let me just give you an example of what the case law, not Ramdeen, says that should be given to the consultees. The nature of the proposal, the reasons why the decision maker is putting forward the proposal, including the evidential base for it and any assumptions made, any advice that the decision maker has received in relation to the proposal, details of the approach that the decision maker proposes to adopt when deciding whether to implement the proposal, and whether there are any realistic alternative options to the proposal. Now, Madam President, why it is important and critically important for us to get it right in this case is because for some reason, what the minister proposes to do, or what the minister has done, subject to the affirmative resolution of the Parliament in this particular case, has been not agreed to by the Dental Council. And that makes it more important for all of us to understand, well, what is the position of the minister and what are the reasons that the minister advances for bringing this order, and what are the justifications that support the position of the Dental Council that they have advanced in the consultation process. And it is up to us as members of Parliament asked to approve this order to determine one way or the other which side of the fence we come down on. But respectfully, Madam President, we can't come down on any side of the fence because we just don't know what sits on either side of the fence. And therefore, I really am left in a state of serious bother as to, well, at the end of this debate, when the vote is taken, upon what basis are we going to simply say that we approve this order? While the Minister of Health tells us about all the different international organizations that are charged with the responsibility for deciding what is the quality of healthcare, what is the quality of teaching and the curriculums, Madam President, this boils down not to any of those issues. We are not asked to determine whether the bodies that assess what goes on at Mona and what goes on at St. Augustine, what goes on in Jamaica and what goes on to Trinidad are discharging their function. What we are asked to do is to ensure that what we do here complies with Section 5(1)(a) of the Dental Profession Act. That is what we are asked to do. And any issue that is raised outside of whether we get it right in relation to the minister bringing this motion and the minister discharging his function separately and properly under Section 5(1)(a) is totally irrelevant. It is not relevant as to whether they are Trinidadians studying in Mona and whether we want to give them an opportunity to come back here. Who would want in their right mind to deny a Trinidadian the opportunity to come back and make a living in the country of his nationality? No one. But that's not what this is about. What this is about is the fact that as we speak here this afternoon, the dental profession is governed by the Dental Profession Act. An order is brought, and we are asked to support that order or to not support that order, depending upon whether the minister, in this case the Minister of Health, has properly discharged his functions. And respectfully, Madam President, from where I sit, we're at a real loss to come to any determination on this. Now, the point that I made earlier, that the minister rightfully corrected me, that he never told us when the consultations began with the Dental Council, is a very relevant one. Because we know that the Dental Council wrote back on the 19th of September 2016. Well, one of the most important factors that one has to consider in determining whether the duty to consult has been lawfully carried out is whether the consultees, that is the Dental Council, was given an adequate time to respond. Well, respectfully, Madam President, I can't determine that because I don't know when they were written, when they were spoken to, as we were told. So if they were spoken to on the 18th and they had to reply by the 19th, well, I don't know if that will pass muster in this particular case. But I can't assume that the minister spoke to them on the 18th, the 17th, the 16th, the 15th, in 2016, in 2015. I just don't know. And we are not told. And it's not good enough, Madam President, to ask us for our support and not provide us with the very necessary information that we need in order to make an informed decision. So again, when one comes to consider whether the Dental Council had enough time to respond and to air their views, well, we just don't know. So let's go again.
Ramdeen, if I may interrupt you at this time. You've spent a considerable amount of time dealing with this issue of consultation, and I think you have spoken about it in great detail. And I'm going to ask you now, are there any other limbs of an argument to present apart from consultation? Because you've spent a lot of time and articulated that point.
Madam Vice President, my entire contribution is based on consultation. Because, and let me just say why. Because, sorry, I don't mean to question the ruling.
I understand, but there is something in the standing orders called tedious repetition, and you've made the point about consultation, so that I'm asking you in your presentation to move on to another point, or, you know, try and bring your contribution to an end, okay?
I'm obliged, Madam Vice President. Madam Vice President, I'm sorry, I apologize. Madam President, all I wish to say to bring that point to an end, Madam President, if you allow me, is that there must be genuine and conscientious consideration of the responses that are given by the Dental Council. So, with respect to the discharge of the functions as prescribed statutorily by Section 51A, Madam President, my respectful position is that it is very difficult to come to a position as to whether the minister has discharged the function that is placed upon him in relation to Section 51A in bringing this order, because I am at a loss with respect to information as to what was done and what happened with respect to the process that was engaged by the minister in this particular case. Madam President, the minister indicated that one of the justifications for the bringing of this order is the fact that there are a limited number of dental professionals in the public healthcare sector. But I'm sure the minister will tell us in his wrapping up, well, when one passes, or if this order is approved, and we have a free flow of persons from Jamaica and throughout the Caribbean who have attended the Mona Dental School and are now eligible to be practicing dentists in our jurisdiction, well, I'm yet to hear how it is that the government proposes to ensure that these persons who are coming into our jurisdiction to practice dentistry are going to be part of the public healthcare sector. Because without some limitation being placed or some mandatory requirement that these persons are required to come back and join the public healthcare sector, we are going to end up, as far as I see, in the same position that we've been in for the last 20 years. Because it's no relief to any of us to say that for the past 20 years, we've had 28 people in the public healthcare sector. And this order, if it's approved, it's not going to change that position, because there is no incentive by virtue of this order that is going to give anyone or anyone is able to accept. Well, what is going to happen? What is different? Or what is different about someone who is qualified in Mona, Jamaica, when they come back into the public healthcare sector to start their profession in dentistry, that is any different from somebody who qualifies in St. Augustine? They are simply going to go into the private healthcare sector, which is obviously more lucrative, and therefore the entire underpinning of the minister's justification for asking us to approve this order, it simply disappears. Because I would have thought that if the minister was saying that after his consultation with the Dental Council and in rejecting their position, we are going to approve this order, then one would have thought the most reasonable thing to do is that for those persons who are coming from the Mona campus, that they would have some type of requirement to serve in the public healthcare sector. Well, that's kind of a circular argument, Madam President. I'll tell you why. Because unless the Minister of Health amends the Dental Profession Act in some way that can find constitutional grounding, you can't do that, because you'll be discriminating against people who are similarly circumstanced. You have two sets of people who have a similar qualification, and you want one set to come back in the public healthcare sector. Well, unless the Minister of Health is prepared to tell us that he's going to make it more attractive in some way for persons to enter the public healthcare sector in the field of dentistry, you're going to, Madam President, the Minister of Health was very descriptive in terms of telling the Parliament how bad it is in terms of dentistry and how urgent and critical it is that we need to pass this order so that the public healthcare sector would be supplied with proper dentists. But respectfully, Madam President, the position with dentists is no different from the position with anesthesiologists, with GPs, with people in orthopedics. It is bad all around. We have a general problem of attracting doctors into the public healthcare sector. That's an inherent problem that we've had from time immemorial. So the idea of saying, well, we need to do this it's so bad in terms of dentistry, well, I don't think that is really made out on the evidence. The other thing, Mr. Vice President, is this. Sorry, I keep saying that. I'm sorry, I apologize. Madam President, is this. The Honourable Minister indicated that we have a real problem in dental care in rural communities and indicated in piloting this order that we really need to do this because the rural communities suffer very badly in relation to dental care. But Madam Vice President, Madam President, I don't think anybody can deny that in the rural communities, healthcare in general suffers from proper care and proper medical professionals. But one would have thought, Madam President, that before we get to the issue of providing healthcare professionals, whether it be in dentistry or in any other field, to the rural communities, the first thing we have to do is educate the people in the rural communities about the fact that they can seek dental care, so they understand what it means, so they understand that they can have access to this kind of health care and is best for them. The fact that the Minister of Health tells us, well, we've achieved a lot by cutting out sugars in schools. Well, yes, that might be good. But does anybody in our rural community understand what the benefit is in doing that? Does anybody in the rural communities understand that it's proper to brush your teeth and to floss and all and go to the dentist and all of these things? The answer is simply no. Because in all of the, well, you're not from well, there are people who don't understand these positions, Madam President, because they're not from those communities. I can speak. Not anymore. I can speak of that because I go into the rural communities and I understand the position that operates there. And at the end of the day, we need, as a country, and the government, whoever sits in the seat of government, needs to take a positive role in educating all of the citizens of the country as to what is best for them in relation to health care. And one would have thought that would have been a precondition before you try to fix the system of putting more people into dental care or bringing more dentists into the jurisdiction, because it's simply like putting the cart before the horse. So,
Senator Ramdeen, I really am reluctant to interrupt you, but you need to tie your contribution and to get back to the matter at hand. You've sought to respond to some of the things the Minister has raised, but please remember the motion is very specific and it is very narrow. So while I've allowed you a lot of leeway, I will ask you please to be relevant to the motion.
I am obliged, Madam President. Madam President, I think that as far as I can, I've discharged my duty in trying to indicate what the problems in supporting this motion is. In summary, I don't think that we've been provided with enough information to make an informed decision as to whether what is required of the Minister to be discharged under the provisions of the Act has been provided to us in this particular case, unfortunately. And I don't think that this is an issue that is centered upon whether we want Trinidadians to come back here and practice as dentists. I will support any provision that is made to better the healthcare sector and to provide proper healthcare to the citizens of this country. But at the same time, I have taken an oath as a member of Parliament to discharge my duty in accordance with upholding the Constitution and the law. And I must hold firm to that oath first before I think about anything else, and I can't do that on the information that has been provided to me in this particular case. I thank you.
Senator Creese.
Thank you, Madam President. I want to begin by thanking the Minister of Health for bringing this matter to our attention. And to be quite frank, I disagree somewhat with my colleague, Senator Roach, on the question of the information which the Minister provided in the preamble to this order. And to that extent, I also disagree somewhat with Senator Ramdeen on that question, because I think Senator Roach was implying that all the minister needed to do was state, this is the order, we want to have another school, Caribbean school, placed on the schedule so that Trinidadian citizens and Caribbean persons generally could be facilitated to practice in Trinidad and Tobago. But I think the minister was doing that. And he was doing that by way of telling us the link between proper dental hygiene, dental care in our lives. And therefore, support for this motion is critical if we are to improve the dental hygiene, dental care that is commonly available, as opposed to what's available in the private sector. So his reference to the fact that there are only 28 dentists in the public, service, again reinforces the need for facilitating the increase in the number of schools. Yes, I take Dr. Mahabir's point that hitherto there has been a North Atlantic bias in terms of the institutions that are available for, or that are promoted, or that information about is easily shared. And that bias should be addressed. So I take Dr. Mahabir's point about one of the oldest institutions, I think he said was Puerto Rico, as being a critical example of what this North Atlantic bias could do to us. So that and then the additional information about healthcare, other healthcare issues that are linked to oral and dental hygiene has been validly part of the argument in support of advancing a motion such as this. Because those of us who are leaving here tonight, now aware, as told by the Minister of Health, who, by the way, is the proper person for giving us these health alerts, as told by him that, listen, diabetes, which is rampant throughout Trinidad and Tobago, myself included, hypertension, strokes, another silent killer. He has brought our attention of the dental oral link to these major diseases in Trinidad and Tobago. So I cannot support the notion that this is irrelevant to the core argument of having an additional institution available for our citizens to study dentistry and their services made available to the wider population. So I disagree with all those who find fault with his introduction of that information. And finally, this is the carnival season. and this is the male machismo season. So the information about the link to erectile dysfunction that you introduced us to, I am sure will stop quite a few in their tracks tonight, if rum doesn't stop them. So again, I think we ought to be clear that the information the minister introduced is par for the course that we are on. What I have a problem with, though, in terms of what has been shared, good, and I think in that regard, perhaps the information that hasn't been forthcoming, because once you introduce the statistic about 28 dentists only, there is need for us to see the lack of convergence between three ministries: Ministry of Health, Ministry of Labor, and the Ministry of Education. Because how is it that we are running into a problem that we are churning out these dentists at St. Augustine, yet we have to try to get dentists from Jamaica? Why? Why is that happening? Why is it that only 28 want to come into the public sector? Is the prescription of going for Jamaican trained dentists the answer? Because if we don't understand what the problem is, then is this the solution? Is this that he has brought to the Parliament's attention what should be before us? Are we being led astray? And I say this in the context that if it is, that the problem is the level of recompense, of salary, of pay that is being offered to dentists in the public sector is the problem, then the Ministry of Labor has a role to play in guiding the Ministry of Health. And the Ministry of Education has a role to play as well. And I say this in the context of past and present educational policies. The whole question of GATE, the whole question of national scholarships comes under serious scrutiny. Because it is at this point we have to ask ourselves, those people who access primary education, okay, universal right, secondary education, universal right, is tertiary education a universal right in our context? Or should there be some conditionalities? Should there be a requirement to repay some or part of it? When you go to a university, St. Augustine, for instance, are you paying the full economic cost? If not, who is paying it? And who do you owe as a result of having accessed that? And that's why I'm saying the other two ministries have to come in, because there has to be a relationship between you getting what is in fact a partial scholarship. It might be a national scholarship in the sense that we know national scholarships. But it is a scholarship. It is, you are in receipt of taxpayer funds, millions of dollars worth of it. And therefore, there should be an obligation to repay. So I'm bringing to question here the whole concept underlying our education system. And that what was the stark information that the Minister of Health and the Minister of Responsibility for Labor drew to our attention when they pointed to the number of people practicing in the public sector as opposed to the number of people in the total health, dental health sector as to the number of people being churned out by the dental school at St. Augustine, in Trinidad, at Mount Hope. So that's the relevance there. And that has to be revisited, because simply throwing Jamaica in the mix does not necessarily mean that these people become available in the public sector. That is not an automatic argument. They may simply set up shop, or simply migrate elsewhere, or simply function in the private sector. So we haven't, if we think we are doing this and we have solved a problem, we just open the door and we don't know what's on the other side of it. on the question of consultation, and I won't be long in this, I can assure you, Madam President, but I wanted to address it because I was concerned, although in proceeding, Senator Ramdeen didn't do what I thought at first he was going to do, which was quote a set of legalese. And I'm always wary of the tendency in our society to focus on the legalese and the legal interpretation and lose sight of the fact that law merely codifies principles. It scarcely ever invents them. So the issue here is really governance, concept of governance. But I realized after a while that Senator Ramdeen was coming closer to that concept of governance as opposed to the legal definition of consultation. Because at the end of the day, and I'm coming back at my good colleagues, Senator with responsibility for labor, and her reference to a prominent labor figure of the past, former Prime Minister, and the definition that he espoused for consultation, which in the book of good governance would be in the index of what not to do. Clearly, you know, these little handbooks they have in the States of how to bill it or how not to do it, that would belong in the book of how not to do it. Because you see, in this parliament, the people who watch us on the TV, listen to us on the radio, or read about us in the written media, tend to come to the conclusion that we don't enrich the debate sometimes, we don't lift the standard. And at the end of the day, it is our duty to lift the standard. It is our duty to give a perspective on consultation that isn't rudimentary. So I tell you, well, look, I'm going to appoint so-and-so, and you tell me, no, don't appoint so-and-so. And there ended consultation. From the perspective of governance, not the legal citations in the law books, good governance, consultation has to be more than that. And where I think Senator Ramdeen was right, and I agree with him, that informing us and asking us to participate in a process requires that we truly be informed. So that an address of that sort should have started with, for X and Y reasons, I brought to the attention of Tom or whoever I'm supposed to consult with the issues and my proposal in that regard, and they replied, and there be a conversation. And it is, of course, at the end of the day, the responsibility and the role of the minister to act in accordance, with the legislation, which is to bring to this House, for the information of this House, what has transpired and what he's going forward with. But there must be information, and the process must have that air of transparency and of exchange and debate. Because if we are to get our people off the path of road rage and violence, then we have to demonstrate the fruitfulness, the frugality of the exchange of ideas, of people interacting in a dynamic way, and not just about, well, I have the power, I'm large, and I'm in charge. That cannot be how we demonstrate good governance. That cannot be how we turn around the negative and violent tendencies that are engulfing us ever so critically. And after the process of consultation, the next step that is critical to us is the whole question of oversight. Oversight in modern democracy. And it is the business of this House to exercise oversight, so that when any minister comes with any legislation, any bill, any amendment, any order, ours is an oversight role. So that Senator Ramdeen was on cue in insisting that information be provided about the process so that we can exercise that oversight function. Because Parliament is about oversight. Let's be clear on that. And we have to act in a manner and demonstrate to the viewers and the listeners and the readers that we are carrying out an oversight function that has certain clear processes. So that the role of the minister in that regard is clear. Which brings to the question then, before we get to this point, was any attempt made to recruit Cuban dentists? We have recruited Cuban general practitioners and so on. Was any attempt made?
I've been listening to you and I understand your thought process, but I just want to talk now about Cuban dentists and efforts to recruit Cuban dentists is really out of the remit of what is before us, and I have to ask you to please narrow your presentation to what is before the House.
I'll be guided, Madam President. Which then brings me to the whole question of, is there here, and this is the feedback that I'm getting on the street, that there's an underlying issue about the citation of the school as opposed to any other school, why this particular school, and if in the context of the dental industry, the public perception, and that is why it's clear for transparency, the public perception is that there is a tendency to keep the profession small. Now, this may be based on negatives or lack of information. But that is why it is critical to be transparent, to dispel those notions that there isn't any perception of a cartelization of the profession and those kinds of negative perceptions. They are creeping in the back door, and it is necessary to dispel them if they are, in fact, totally unfounded. But this is some of what you are picking up on the street when you ask people what they think of this matter. The other thing that was raised was the question, I think it was by Senator Mark, about is this just an exercise in majoritan rule? And I think he was placing on the continuum at the one end democratic liberal tendencies, and at the other end and a sort of abuse of your majority. Okay, well, I could come here and the existing act allows me to amend the order. And I'm going through a quick ceremony, So I picked up in Senator Mark's contribution a concern that there wasn't a commitment to a democratic engagement, to a parliamentary conversation. Good? And I think that is something we need to be wary of. Again, remember, the same youth who we condemn are viewing us, and they're viewing the extent to which we seriously engage each other as opposed to just oppose each other and looking for quick wins. So from that context, we have to be careful. So I think we must be wary of appearing to exercise power sometimes a bit needlessly and failing to engage in the conversation that should be the preamble to the decision making. The other thing is that we need to decide in this house, in the society generally, how we are proceeding with the liberalization of health care. Are we going to wait another 5 years to declare an individual school as an amendment? or are we going to take steps to deal with the dichotomy between accreditation of institutions and the power or the authority to practice? Because it would appear that at one end of the continuum is the accreditation process, and the next end is the dental board, medical board arrangement. In all the various professions, this turns up, right? And I'm recommending to the minister that there's need for review of that, because clearly this is a lengthy process to deal with this, and it would apply to the other specialist functions, because dentistry is really just one of them. So there's need to look again at that. And finally, what I would like to close on is the broader issue that we need to address, and that is in terms of the provision of dental care. Are we satisfied that at this stage of our development that there's going to be just clinic days? In other words, what would this order achieve? Are we clear on what its expected outcomes? Because at the end of this exercise, we should be in a position to say, well, we were attempting to get this number of dentists per this number of members of the population. And thus far, I haven't had any indication of what the perceived outcomes. And I always feel that any measure should have measurable indices. If you can't measure it, then don't attempt to do it, because you won't know when it's done. So I would hope that the minister would indicate to us in his closing arguments exactly what are the statistically verifiable objectives that we are going after with this measure, so that we could monitor it and review it accordingly. I thank you, Madam President.
Senator Chote.
Madam President, thank you for the opportunity to speak. And because we are a little tired, it's been a long evening, I will start on a dramatic point. There was an infamous criminal in one of the South American countries who used to say that if you are not with me, it means that you are against me. And he used that to justify carrying out mass murders of men, women, and children, and almost broke the back of his country. I think when we discuss a matter like this, and we listen to the tone of some of the speakers, or we hear the background comments and so on, you really wonder whether we are doing ourselves and this honorable country a service by treating this matter in that way. It's either you are with me on this order or you are not with me. This is not a war. This is a simple discussion amongst adults in a parliament, in a democracy. Now, having said that, I listened to the ministers, the honorable ministers' reasons for wanting our approval for this order, which he has agreed to. And unfortunately, what the minister is doing a very small thing when he can actually be doing something which is far more beneficial to the country as a whole instead of to some persons alone. It is quite clear to me from the fact that the Honorable Minister of Labour read the letter of one of the students, Mr. Straker, who really made a cri du coeur in his letter, a cry from the heart, to say, listen, I have studied and now I'm facing a situation where I cannot practice the profession that I really would like to practice. And I am sure that there are other persons studying in those classes with Mr. Straker who are facing the same quandary, same difficulty. And I have to say I feel his pain, because when I started reading law in 1984, the law was changed for admissions as a lawyer. So instead of being able to be called to the bar in England and then come down and spend a few months at Hugh Wooding and be able to practice, the law was changed to say, well, even if you did that, you have to do 2 years at Hugh Wooding Law School. So unfortunately, in academic environments, these things can happen and they can have very serious repercussions for the students involved. The difference between my situation and Mr. Straker's, of course, is that the change of law occurred after I had begun my studies, when Mr. Straker began his study of law with the existing act in place and there being no accreditation for the Jamaican Dental School in the act. Now, I think that when the Honorable Minister spoke to us about CAAM/HP and so on, I think sometimes we need to break this down, these acronyms down a little bit, because it sounds nice amongst ourselves, but I'm not quite sure that the people listening to us understand what these terms mean. And very quickly, I will try to explain. This is a Caribbean Accreditation Authority for education in medicine and other health professions. It came about because the Americans were saying, their education department said in the late 1970s, early 1980s, that they wanted to make sure that universities from the Caribbean met their standards. So CARICOM entered into an agreement to say that we agree that we will try to meet these standards so that our students will be able to get into their schools. So that's what that accreditation is about. Let us put things where they belong. And that accreditation, with all due respect, doesn't really carry us too far in our consideration of whether we should support this order or not. The irony of this is quite funny, because after Senator Mahabir spoke and named the universities which are now top of the line when it comes to the study of dentistry, I realized that the accrediting group, or the experts for CAAM/HP, are called the World Federation of Medical Education. And the top guy there is from one of the universities not listed in our act. So there is a complete fracture or dislocation between this whole so-called accreditation process for the American schools and other courses of study. What I would respectfully suggest we do is that instead of making matters difficult, because if this order is passed, I'm not saying that I am necessarily opposed to it, it's just that I feel that why bring it to Parliament only to do something small when you can do something much bigger and have a wider impact and lift the level of your professional grouping in that area? So what I'm suggesting is that perhaps the minister should consider removing the schedule entirely. that way, nobody could claim that they are unequally treated. Because this way, if we have this order worded as it is, it means those people who come back to practice as dentists will now say, will now think, or the others here may think, that, listen, they were treated more favorably than we were because we had to do more clinical work to be registered, and they didn't have to do as much on that kind of thing. Why open up the hornet's nest? Why not make it clean, clear, upgrade your standards in one easy motion? And this is what I respectfully, through you, Madam President, ask the Honorable Minister to consider. Because out of the 50 top schools for dental studies in the world, we have Sweden, we have all of those cited by Senator Mahabir. We have people, 3 universities in Brazil accredited in the top 50. Now, let's not talk about the problem of language, because we have people who speak other languages who come and practice medicine in our country. And we have Trinidad and Tobagonian citizens who speak English as their native language who go and work in other countries. So language is not an issue in the modern day professional world. So let's put that aside. So these people, if we remove the schedule, it means that students from these institutions may also seek registration under our Act and practice here. Now, the point that I would like to make now is something which I only discovered last August, which is to say that many of these European universities, in Sweden and so on, their fees are actually considerably lower than what your citizens here would have to pay in the United States of America, Canada, and the United Kingdom. They are much lower. In fact, in some courses, they are minimal. Because these universities want to attract a global intelligentsia, as it is, as I may describe it, their fees are lower, and they offer some of their courses in English. So we can open up a world for our young people. Let us not legislate only for the people like Mr. Straker and those students who have studied dentistry and find themselves in this fix. Let us legislate for the future of our young people by opening up this avenue of education for them so that they can come back and improve our lot in this country. And I very respectfully, Honorable Minister, through you, Madam President, ask you to consider that. Now, on the issue of unemployment, I must say I was a little shocked to hear that there are only 28 dentists in the public service and none has been hired for the last 20 years. Well, what about... I see. Because I was just about to ask, and perhaps in your wrap-up you may have an answer to it, but I wasn't quite clear. Because I know that we have Island Scholarship winners who go and study dentistry, and they are required to serve the state for the length of time of their studies. So by any stretch of the imagination, I think we should have more than 28, unless it is that the state has not been in a position to take up these students and hire them, so they have become relieved of their contracts. I don't know what the situation is, but certainly there is something a bit odd about there being such a small figure for dentists working in the public service. Now, I would like us to stay away from the whole issue of what the Accreditation Council says and so on. I know Senator Creese says we shouldn't get too much into legalese, but we're looking at the law. So I'm sorry, through you, Madam President, to Senator Creese, I had to look at the law. When we look at the Accreditation Act, what the Accreditation Act does is it sets out in Section 2 what the Accreditation Board and Council are entitled to do. And it describes what accreditation means. And it also sets out in the Act what the powers are. Now, I don't know why on earth the Accreditation Board saw it necessary to write that letter for the Honourable Minister to provide to Parliament when Parliament was exercising its oversight powers, but certainly perhaps they need to take a second look at it, because I don't know that the Accreditation Act permits the board to issue such a letter to influence the way parliamentarians think and vote, because their interpretation of their powers, in my respectful view, is clearly wrong. So, Honourable Minister, I would also ask, and I'm picking up, while other senators speak, I'm picking up little dog whistles here and there, for want of a better word. You know, we're talking about Trinidad and Jamaica, and Jamaicans coming down here, and that kind of thing. And we want to keep the dental profession to a small, confined group, like a clique.
No, I said CARICOM, not Jamaica, CARICOM.
Yes, I beg your pardon. But I don't think that that kind of use of language or those comments are of any use whatever to us in the exercise of our oversight function in this matter. We are part of CARICOM. We have long had cooperation in our education systems with campuses in Trinidad, Barbados, Jamaica, and elsewhere. So this whole thing about the creation of some sort of dissonance in education on this issue of the registration of dentists, I really think it is an attempt to distract from what the real issue is. Madam President, these are my comments on this order, and I thank you very much for the opportunity to make them.
Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Madam President. So, Madam President, it's now 7:30. We have been at it for 6 hours, 7:34. And I want to thank all honourable members for their very good contributions. I don't know if I'll have enough time to answer every single concern, but I will start with the last senator first. And I must say that the phrase, "if you are not with me, you are against me," does not do justice to the relationship between the Ministry of Health and the Dental Council. The fact that we disagree on one matter does not mean we disagree on everything else. And I really thought that that statement was a bit unbecoming, and I will say why. Our consultations with the Dental Council as early as December 2017, we have looked at all the recommendations they are making for amendments to their act, and we are giving them serious consideration. And one that we are totally agreed on is the issue of continuing medical education, continuing education. I supported it, they are supporting it. So the Medical Council and the Ministry of Health is in accordance.
Continue, Minister.
Thank you, Madam President. So the Dental Council and ourselves are agreed on many things. And all of the issues honorable senators made about amendments to the Dental Profession Act have been provided to the ministry, and a team including the legal department, the chief medical officer, and our dental persons at the ministry and the RHA are looking at all of those things. So I want to give all senators the assurance that every single issue that the Dental Council has proposed to us is receiving our active consideration. I want to go to the issue of consultation that Senator Ramdeen raised, and he raised a very important point. This issue of consultation on this particular matter has a lifespan of over 2 years. The consultation started since 2016 when a group of students, through the Jamaican High Commissioner in Jamaica, Fitzgerald Jeffrey, the Honorable Fitzgerald Jeffrey, wrote to the Minister of Health in early 2016 a series of letters, which I then passed on to the Dental Council via the Chief Medical Officer. And I want to quote a letter of 28th March 2017 addressed to the Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Roshan Parasram. Thank you for forwarding this letter to the Dental Council. We have addressed this issue on several prior occasions. So consultation was going on several prior occasions. Last year, meaning 2016, we met with Professor Fletcher and Dr. Jones of the Faculty of Medical Sciences, University of the West Indies, UWI, Mona, to discuss the matter. Additionally, which means in addition to all that, in 2016, we corresponded with the students, informing them of our opinion, along with the Honorable Minister of Health, Terrence Deyalsingh. So I am putting down a track that consultation started on the words of the Dental Council in 2016. There's another letter of May 24th, 2017. In the interim, I would have met with the Dental Council on at least 2 occasions. That culminated in the letter I quoted today of September 19th, 2016. After September 19th, 2016, I again, with officials of the Ministry of Health, met with the Dental Council in December of 2017 to alert them to the fact that we want to bring this amendment. So the consultations was there from the genesis to the conclusion. Everybody had a chance, the consultor, the consultee had a chance to weigh in on the matters. So all consultations were had. I want to just touch on a point that Senator Ramkissoon made. Senator Ramkissoon made the point that a dentist that she knows can't get a position in the public healthcare system. Let me just put on record, and she also mentioned house officers. And I think the population needs to know this, and I'm going to say this for the first time. The Minister of Health is always called upon why I am not hiring house officers or dentists now. Do you know that we have problems with doctors and dentists who refuse to work in the rural areas? In other words, one mother went so far as to tell me,
Madam President, in accordance with Standing Order 14.5, I beg to move that the Senate continue to sit until the completion of the business at hand.
Honourable Senators, the question is that the Senate do continue to sit until the completion of the business at hand. Those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Those against say no. This Senate will continue to sit until the completion of the business at hand. Continue, Minister.
Thank you. So, Senator Ramkissoon, through you, Madam Speaker, there are doctors and dentists who refuse to work in Mount Hope because they live in Diego Martin. They will only accept a job if they get a job with the Northwest RHA. One mother went so far as to tell me she will only allow her son, who is a house officer, to take up a position in Eric Williams where there was a vacancy if I give him a priority bus route pass. That's true. I got another call from a mother of a house officer who is objecting that her son has to work at 1 a.m. in the morning. That's the job of a doctor. When you sign up, that's what you sign up for. But you can't get them to work outside a 5-mile radius of their homes. And well, you may not agree, but that's what we are faced with. We can't get people to work in Point Fortin because it's too far. We can't get people to work in Sangre Grande because it's too far. And that's why you have some vacancies there. So I just wanted to put that on the table to answer some of your concerns. On the issue of consultation again, could you imagine if a government, look at what we are faced with here today, divergent views, have a schedule, don't have a schedule. To whom does the government listen? So we consult, we take everything into consideration, but at the end of the day, the executive has to make a decision in the best interest of the people who elected that government to make certain decisions. There is no agreement here amongst the independents and the opposition as to whether you need a schedule or not. But we consulted, we listened, but as an elective executive, setting policy, we have to make a decision. And not all decisions are going to meet with 100% approval 100% of the time. But there was consultation. Yes, Senator Roach.
Thank you, Honorable Minister,
No
for
problem.
giving way. I was hoping that I will get an opportunity to just explain something. But as you are on the point of consultation, my esteemed colleague, Senator Ramdeen, did speak and give a very informative and accurate discourse about what consultation consists of. But what was missing from that at the end of the day, which I acted upon in responding to your requests in support of the order, is that there is an administrative principle in law called the presumption of administrative regularity. I'm not trying to take the function of the Attorney General in advising his cabinet. And that simply means that official acts are presumed to be done properly and legally unless it is rebutted by the person who's seeking to take objection with by hard evidence. And this is not what was before you today. So I presume that what was done regularly and was done correctly.
Thank you very much. On the issue of quacks, several members raised the issue of quacks in dentistry. That is a criminal matter, should be reported to the police, should be reported to the DPP, and a complaint made to the Dental Council. It is not for the Dental Council, I believe, to initiate proceedings. These are just some of the things that came out today. Madam President, Senator Mahabir made the points about dental nurses, auxiliary nurses. As I said, all of these matters are currently before the Ministry of Health based on the recommendations made by the Dental Council. So all of these things are receiving active consideration. On the issue of Cuban pharmaceuticals, I think someone raised the issue. It is difficult right now to import pharmaceuticals from Cuba because I've been looking at it simply because they don't manufacture and package their drugs with English writing. It's only in Spanish. I have looked into that. So once we could get them to give us English packaging, we could have their drugs approved here. On the issue, Senator Mark made a lot of heavy weather, and I think some of his language was quite graphic, allowing people to come through the cracks. You know, when we make statements in this honorable chamber, sorry? Can I assist you, Senator? When we make statements like that, people coming through the cracks, these words are carried worldwide. They will reach CARICOM. Here we are in this Senate, Madam President, speaking about nationals of CARICOM. attending the region's premier tertiary education. And we use words, the UNC use words like people coming through the cracks. These are our people. We are Caribbean people studying at the University of the West Indies, a world-renowned and world-recognized institution. How can we say that? How can we? These words have implications for our image in CARICOM. Senator Mark also made the point that nationals in Barbados, if we want to go Barbados, we have to write an exam. So here we are. We are treating this as a zero-sum game. In other words, you blind me, I blind you. You kill me, I kill you. So just because Barbados wants an exam, for spite, we must have an exam. Trinidad and Tobago, under this government, and that is why we always say, the People's National Movement is a nationalistic government. A nationalistic government. And because Trinidad and Tobago...
Senator Obika, no, I know you're apologizing, but this is the second time I've had to speak to you. Please do not let there be a third, okay? Continue, Minister.
And that is why we have to re-establish our role in CARICOM. We abdicated our role in CARICOM as a leader in CARICOM for 5 years. It is time we re-establish that role. And if by doing this simple amendment, it paves the way for CARICOM to relook at the matter, then so be it. But no, according to the UNC and Senator Mark, because Barbados wants that, we must, for spite. So you blind me, I blind you, and what you end up with is a whole society of blind people. This is not a zero-sum game. This is not nuclear warfare. I bomb you, you bomb me. The People's National Movement is above that. We have gone way past that. We are for CARICOM. We are for integration. And if this simple amendment can help us in that movement, well, let's rejoice in that. Let's rejoice in that. Madam Speaker, President, Senator Mark made the other statement. He objects to students to coming from Mona to operate on our mouths. Oh, what is that? The students from Mona, just like Trinidad students, will get their temporary registration. They do 1 year internship, and on successful completion of 1 year internship, under the guidance of a registered dentist, they are given full license to practice. What is wrong with that? But the fear-mongering, again, is just phenomenal. You know, I thought, forget what I thought, because the Senate is a place that I came from, and I hold it in such high regard. There's such high regard. It is just sad to see sometimes where it goes. Madam President, some other points made about how do we guarantee work in the public sector. You can't guarantee it, but you could encourage it. And what the Minister of Education is trying to do is to make sure those students who access GATE funding live up to the expectations of the country which paid for them to get their education, and that is to give national service. Also, some of our national scholars are bonded, and we will be seeing about that. Also, what the research has shown, the more interns you put into the public sector, the greater your chance of them remaining in the public sector. So I can't stand here and guarantee you that you are going to fill every single vacancy, but let us try. Because we did nothing for 20 years, and we remained with the same 28 doctors 28 dentists in the public health sector for 20 years because no one tried. This is an attempt to redress that. As it goes to the comprehensive change to the schedule, as I said, that is currently before the Ministry of Health. The Dental Council has provided us with that, and we will look at that. The issue that someone raised, I think it was Senator Haynes, and I really enjoyed her contribution.
Minister, clarification? Just a point of clarification, Minister.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you for giving way. The issue of 28 dentists remaining fixed for a number of years, I'm just wondering whether in the Ministry of Health there are only 28 positions available for dentists, or whether you have more positions than 28.
There are more positions, okay? The issue of writing different exams for different Caribbean countries, I think, does not arise because in the United States, they operate a federal system, just like Australia, sometimes like Canada. We don't have a federal system in Trinidad and Tobago. So I hope that clears up that. The issue of discipline, I think, Senator Haynes, you would have raised that. Senator Saddam Hosein, you would have raised the issue of discipline. What is the Ministry of Health doing as far as disciplining dentists is concerned? The disciplining of any profession should primarily be that of the professional body. However, the Ministry of Health does have a role to play in guiding that. So, again, that is currently before us, but we can't have a knee-jerk reaction to disciplinary procedures as presented to us. What we have to look at is, one, constitutionality. Two, what is best practice in other dental jurisdictions, and also how does that line up with disciplining in other professions? Because you don't want to have one profession disciplining in one way, another profession with similar responsibilities disciplined in another way. So there has to be some sort of understanding and harmonization of disciplining their members. And that should really be driven by the Dental Council with the advice of a policy position by the government of the day. And that is currently before us, as everything with auxiliary nurses, continuing medical education, and all of these things. So I give you the assurance, Senator Hussain, that that is actively being looked at. I think I'm correct now. Senator Haynes made the point about facilities. Yes. So I can assure you, as I said in my piloting, we are looking at improving the facilities at many of our health centers. Because, and you are right, that has been neglected for years, for decades, right? Recently, we had the refurbished Rocha Douglas Health Center where I went down to. We are refurbishing the Rio Claro Health Center. We are putting in more dental equipment in many of our health centers, Toko, Siparia, Couva. So you are spot on. That is an area of our healthcare delivery which has been neglected for decades. And we are facing up to that head on. So I give you the assurance, Honorable Senator, that it is high on the agenda. That is the whole thing about primary health care, which includes because that is where the action is in health care. What has happened, Senator Haynes, over the years, is that we have focused on building our tertiary institutions. So we do all these wonderful dialysis, we do all these wonderful bypass surgeries, we do all these wonderful things. But the population and the ministry and the RHAs have forgotten that the real healthcare benefits start at the primary level. So your health centers have to become an oasis in all their communities where they go and get their basic health needs attended to prevent them from presenting to a secondary institution and a tertiary institution. So I give you the assurance that it is high on this government's agenda. I want to really thank Senator Roach for his short but lucid intervention. I think you really hit the nail on his head as to why this order is so simple, and you drew the analogy to the two law schools in Jamaica. I want to thank you very much, Senator Roach, for doing that. But I think, Senator Roach, through you, Madam Speaker, you see, we could use this as a catalyst to send a message to UWI that the whole issue of degree harmonization by the university needs to be put on the front burner. It's one university, different campuses, but it's one university. So this, as I said, could be part of Caribbean integration in tertiary education. Because you have law schools in Trinidad, you have law schools in Jamaica, you have a law school in Barbados, right? Yeah. I think you have one in Guyana, Bahamas, right? So you really, the CARICOM really needs to look at this, and I think the contribution of Senator Roach and our advocacy here today could really be a catalyst to take this towards Caribbean integration as far as tertiary education is concerned. So, Madam Speaker, Madam President, I think I have addressed most of the issues raised by honorable colleagues. I want to thank them most sincerely, starting with Senator Haynes, Senator Mark, Senator Hussain, Senator Ramdeen, Senator Huggins, Senator Baptiste-Primus, Senator Roach, Senator Ramkissoon, Senator Chote, and Senator Creese. I think all contributions were well-meaning. They elucidated several points. And with those few words, Madam President, I beg to move.
Honourable Senators, the question is, be it resolved that the Dental Profession Amendment to the Schedule Order 2017 be approved. Those in favour say aye. Aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. The motion is therefore carried.
Madam President, I beg to move that the Senate do now adjourn to Tuesday, 20th February 2018 at 1:30 p.m. The government proposes to deal with the second reading of the bill entitled An Act to Amend the Mutual Assistance in Criminal Matters Act, the Proceeds of Crime Act, Financial Intelligence Unit of Trinidad and Tobago Act, the Customs Act, and the Exchange Control Act.
Honourable Senators, before I put the question on the adjournment, leave has been granted for a matter to be raised on the motion for the adjournment of the Senate. Senator Mark.
Yes. Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, the government needs to take climate change more seriously. After signing the Paris Agreement in December of 2015, Trinidad and Tobago has gone to sleep and is yet to ratify the COP21 agreement, which is the next stage in the process to implement.
Honourable Senators, may I remind you that we are still sitting, and can we listen to Senator Mark in silence, please? Senator Mark, continue.
Thank you. Madam President, the failure of the government to ratify the Paris Climate Agreement puts our country among 21 countries out of 195 in the world who have not yet done so, representing some 15% of the world's countries. Madam President, we ought to be committed towards working towards global mitigation as it relates to climate change. Every country in the Caribbean, I understand, and in fact the entire Commonwealth has already ratified the Paris Climate Agreement. Trinidad and Tobago is trailing CARICOM. And under this Rowley-led PNM, Trinidad and Tobago has surrendered its leadership role in CARICOM. That is what Trinidad and Tobago has done. Madam President, signatories to the agreement collectively committed to reducing greenhouse gas emissions to targets which is known as nationally determined contributions, or NDCs. Trinidad and Tobago has committed to the unconditional reduction of greenhouse gas emissions from the public transportation sector, from power generation, and other segments making up the industrial sector of our republic. But, Madam President, in the absence of ratification, this country, our country, remains highly vulnerable to the effects of climate change. And this is manifested through temperature increases, changes in sea levels, increased flooding, increased frequency and intensity of hurricanes, Madam President, hillside erosion, and also the loss of coastal habitats. So, Madam President, whilst we are not even part of the main Atlantic hurricane belt, our exposure has been increased because of this rapid change in the climate of the global community and this universe that we inhabit. And therefore, we are now more exposed to the potential of being hit by very powerful tropical storms, as we witnessed in the recent past. So why is Trinidad and Tobago that played a leadership role under Basdio Pandey, the former Prime Minister who has now passed on, Patrick Manning, the Honorable Kamla Prasad Bisesa? Why it is we are falling behind this time? Madam President, what explains every CARICOM country having ratified the Paris Climate Agreement, and Trinidad and Tobago has not done that up to this time? Why is that, Madam President? What excuse can we offer our nation for this situation? Madam President, because of the failure of the government of Trinidad and Tobago to ratify the Paris Climate Agreement, we have now been placed in the distinguished company of the following countries. We are now placed with Equatorial Guinea, Eritrea, Guinea-Bissau, Colombia, Iraq, Iran, Kuwait, Lebanon, Oman, Mozambique, South Sudan, Yemen. Madam President, well, the United States, I even get involved in that. You know that. So don't even mention them. They are not part of it. Right? So let us not even mention the United States, Madam President. So, Madam President, we would like to call on the Honorable Minister of Foreign Affairs. I hope that he rises tonight, because sometimes he gives the impression that he's sleeping on the job. He gives the impression that he's sleeping on the job. Madam President, we call on the Honorable Minister of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs and the government of Trinidad and Tobago to man up and to ratify the Paris agreement, climate agreement now. Wake up and ratify it. Madam President, why are we as a country dilly-dallying on this matter? Why are we snoring in the mountains like Rip Van Winkle? 20 years, snoring away while the world is changing, Madam President. Madam President, we want to appeal to the Honorable Minister of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs, whose responsibility is to sign this agreement and to sign it now, to ratify it rather. Ratify the agreement now. And let us join, Madam President, with that sea of humanity that has taken the progressive decision to ratify that very important Paris Climate Agreement. So therefore, we eagerly await the rising from the deep slumber of this government to address this critical matter. And in closing, we call on the government on behalf of the people of Trinidad and Tobago to ratify the Paris Climate Agreement and do it now. I thank you very much, Madam President.
Minister of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs.
Madam President, thank you very much for the opportunity. What an affair. What imagery. Madam President, the particularities of our economy, dependent as it is on the petroleum and petrochemical sector, are such that due care and diligence were required in the treatment of the matter of the ratification of the Paris Agreement by Trinidad and Tobago. The attendant responsibilities and potential costs involved were most present in our deliberations as a team. Madam President, scurrilous submissions, scurrilous that is, submissions here are hardly likely to advance our interests as a country. What imagery, as I mentioned earlier, and theatrics that were offered to us. I do not support the motion or the submission that was made a while ago, presented by Senator Mark. There is no failure here. We, as a responsible government, have succeeded in safeguarding the interests of our country, exercising due care and diligence before committing, or rather coming to a decision. Allow me, Madam President, to laud, give recognition, and congratulate my colleague, the Minister of Planning and Development, staff members of that said ministry, as well as the staff members of the Ministry of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs, for their service to our country in ensuring that we stay on the right track. We have treated with the concerns we had and are well on our way to doing what is required and what was contemplated when the Paris Agreement was signed last year, if my recall is correct. So therein lies correction.
Signed in December of 2015, I understand.
Yes.
And you signed it? Sorry.
A bit of education is in order here. So as I said, my recall is that it was not in December 19, rather 2015.
When was it?
I had the privilege, Madam President, to affix my signature to the agreement on behalf of our country. Madam President, once again, permit me to register my opposition to the submission, the motion that was presented by the good Senator Mark, and my thanks for the opportunity afforded.
Honourable Senators, before I put the question to adjourn, allow me to wish everyone here a safe and happy carnival. And Honourable Senators, the question is that this Senate do now adjourn to Tuesday, the 20th of February, 2018 at 1:30 p.m. All in favour say aye. Aye. Those against say no. The ayes have it. This Senate now stands adjourned to Tuesday, the 20th of February, 2018 at 1:30 p.m.